Hola. Bueno, vamos a continuar con el Congreso. Además, tenemos la suerte de contar ahora mismo con James CUSACK. Él es director de Ciencia e Investigación en Autística. Me ha dicho que no haga demasiada presentación porque así puede presentarse él, pero bueno, sí que recordaros que tiene muchísima experiencia trabajando e investigando en autismo, que hizo su doctorado en la Universidad de Aberdeen, con personas con autismo y sobre todo detectando cómo ellos detectaban las acciones de los demás. De hecho, gracias a eso, postdoctoralmente ha desarrollado una medida automatizada de la imitación facial que se está usando tanto con personas con autismo como con personas con otros trastornos afectivos y esquizofrenia. Es un consultor, activista y yo creo que sobre todo lo que él quiere es garantizar que el derecho de las personas con autismo de una vida larga y feliz. Thank you, James.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you all today. I'm really honoured to have the opportunity. I'm going to try and speak quite slowly because the translators have quite a difficult job because I have quite a strong Scottish accent, which makes it difficult for English people to understand what I'm saying. So it's difficult for everyone. But I'm from a part of Scotland called Aberdeen, and it's renowned for having quite a difficult to understand accent. So when I came down to live and work in London for Autistica, I had to do quite a lot of work to make myself understood. So yeah, I'll do my very best. Please bear with me. So thank you so much for the introduction. I'm the Chief Executive of Autistica. Prior to being the Chief Executive of Autistica, I was Austica's Director of Research, and I used to be an academic, and I've worked directly with autistic people and families. I've worked in policy on the Scottish Autism Strategy Bill, which led to Scotland's first ever autism strategy, and I've worked in England on its autism strategy and policy around England as well. I became interested in autism initially because I was diagnosed with it as a child and had received specialist support from quite a young age, from about 3 years old. I'm excited to speak to you today because what I'm going to really be doing is sharing the work that Autistica has been doing, sharing some of our thinking around why research can be such a powerful tool for change for autistic people and their families, and why we urgently need that research to radically address the inequalities that autistic people face. So, Autistica is the UK's leading autism research and campaigning charity, and our mission is to create breakthroughs that enable autistic people to live happier, healthier, and longer lives. And so that word breakthrough is really important to us. It's about creating changes, innovations from research through to policy, through to the real world that make a real difference to people. And that's really what Autistica is about. There are a lot of research charities that focus simply on just funding discrete research studies. We don't want to do that. We want to fund research which has a very clear theory of change that can be used to change the mind of governments across the world and then to ultimately change lives. And that's why we think research is so important. It can help us to identify problems, understand contexts, address those factors, test solutions, help us to understand what works, understand how to implement those solutions into services and bring real change for people. And that's essentially what the slide here is talking about. It's talking about how research can really radically address the challenges that people face in life. And it's important that we do that because Unfortunately, according to a number of research studies, we do know that there's quite significant inequalities that autistic people face. Certainly in the UK, there's a feeling of abandonment for families and autistic children and adults. In the UK, it's not uncommon for people to wait 3 or 4 years for a diagnosis, and then they may be offered limited stereotyped interventions and approaches which aren't necessarily evidence-based or no support, and that can lead to deteriorating mental health, no plan, no responsibility, and then potentially really serious inequalities. And what we are looking to do is to create systems which are sustainable and evidence-led. They can really change that. So making sure people get the right support, have needs-led interventions, support to get into work, proper systems of stepped care, which means that support adjusts according to people's needs at a particular point in life. People can get into work, have the proper adjustments, and succeed and live the life that they want to lead. I'm also quite a fierce defender of autism research. I think people will have noticed since the 1980s there's been a huge acceleration in the amount of autism research. And although I think there can be a sense that autism research, could autism research have delivered more by this period? Why don't we understand more? There's so much to understand, and I definitely agree with that. I think we need to celebrate the fact that we do already also understand quite a lot about autism. We understand that autism has a significant genetic component. We understand ways in which we can diagnose autism. We understand some of the signs of autism. We've got some biological understanding, signatures which help us to understand autism, so using things like EEG. We understand some interventions which may work in autism, which I think Jonathan Green presented to earlier. We understand lots about autism in adulthood, as Hilda shared, and things about anxiety and autism as well. So we're making really some quite fantastic progress. The key now is to make sure that research has the best possible theory of change in connection to reality and autistic people's lives. Research can, of course, still be quite focused on biology and causes, which is important, but an over-focus on that and a lack of focus on people's priorities and people's lives can ultimately become a distraction. And it's really important that we engage with autistic people and their families throughout their life to make sure that we're not just building research which has a robust evidence base, but to ensure that it is authentically and sustainably delivering change that affects their lives. And that's why we really need to be focusing on the priorities of autistic people and their families. And that's something that we are extremely proud that we do at Autistica. So we focus on understanding autistic people's priorities, doing exercises, listening exercises, having an ongoing dialogue with autistic people and families to understand what types of research are important for them. And within that, it's really important to understand every autistic person's story. And it's also important to create the structures that will enable us to ensure that throughout the research process, autistic people and their families can feel really actively engaged and make sure that they make a meaningful difference to the research that's ongoing. And that's particularly crucial in autism, as I'm sure you all understand from potentially other areas of medical research, because we know that being autistic is fundamentally about having a different lived experience and understanding of the world. And that makes it quite distinct from, maybe more sort of medical areas, so things like cancer or so on, where you're talking about really what is ultimately a disease mechanism, and that's not how we see autism at all. So we've done a lot of work to understand that. We've undertaken systematic exercises, and what we commonly find is that autistic people tell us that they need support with understanding issues like mental health, issues like anxiety, making sure they get practical support, making sure their health needs are met, and a range of other areas like that. And a key other thing that comes out really from autistic people in the dialogue that we've had from them is that if the world could be a little bit more adaptable and understanding, that would go a long way to enabling autistic people to succeed and thrive in society. So what we do as a charity is we try to make sure that the ideas and the need for research is made clear, and and autistic people are engaged throughout that process. And they help us to set our priorities and help us to influence others in terms of their priorities. We have an insight group of autistic people who are research trained, who work with us and with other researchers on research design. We have that insight group is about 250 autistic people and family members. We have an autistic network who helps recruit into research studies, and then an insight group again helps us to analyse data and research findings and prepare outputs which we then share with the broader community as well. And so the key thing that I'm saying here is that we have autistic people and families engaged throughout the full cycle of the work that we do. I'm just going to get my water, so I'm just going to... Perfect. So, I became CEO a couple of years ago, so 2 years ago, in August 2020. It was a really interesting period of time. We were, I think, 4 or 5 months into the pandemic, and a real difficult period of uncertainty for all of us, and in particular, many autistic people. And one of the things that I felt really passionate about when I became CEO is that we needed to not just think about how we do what we do, so delivering solutions, focusing on the priorities of autistic people and their families, world-class research, but we needed to turn that into something a little bit more concrete and outcome-focused. We needed to really be clear, based on the conversations and the stories that we'd heard, what exactly our goals were. And really, based on the foundations of the brilliant work that's been going on from a research perspective and in terms of the policy landscape, it really felt like, and it does feel like to me, that this next decade is a real opportunity to deliver huge change for autistic people and their families, and that change is urgently needed given the significant inequalities that autistic people experience. So, through our work and through the work that we've done over the previous 5 years, we came up with six goals. And they were to ensure that by 2030, we made change in 6 areas. To ensure that all autistic people will have proven support from day one, that the employment rate will double for autistic people. So in the UK, at the time we created this goal, the employment rate for autistic people, according to the Office for National Statistics, was 21.7%. And we want that to double to 43.4% by 2030. That autistic people have proven treatments for anxiety, which we know is a huge priority for autistic people. That public spaces are more accessible. That to tackle the significant health inequalities and life expectancy inequalities that autistic people face, that every autistic person is offered a yearly tailored health check. And then finally, to ensure that attitudes to autistic people will change. There's been a huge amount of work done to raise awareness of autism, but we don't actually have a huge amount of evidence on how we change attitudes and behaviours towards autistic people, and that's really critical. if we're to do this as quickly as possible and in the most sustainable and effective way. So, like I said, this comes down to people's individual stories and how we affect change for people's individual lives. And when you're a research charity, it's very easy to look at the data and to think about this in that context. But as I'm sure many of you are all aware, in the work that you do directly working with autistic people, this is about people's everyday lives. And I thought I'd share with you a story from my own life. So, as I told you earlier, I'm Scottish, and this is me with my family, and I think you can spot that my brother and my dad are wearing a kilt, but I refuse to wear a kilt at this point in time because it made me quite uncomfortable, and not because I didn't like the concepts of it, just the sort of sensory experience of it. So I wore an Aberdeen football top and then a tracksuit instead, which my grandmother wasn't overly delighted about, but she got her head around it in the end. So this was a really scary time for my parents, actually, and for me. I had required quite a lot of support from a young age, but nobody really understood why. And I kept going to this hospital and seeing this person, and I didn't really understand why. And I remember one day I was waiting in the car, so I was about 12 at this point. It was my mum's Renault Clio, and I was bored, to be honest with you. And my mum came back into the car, and she was in tears, and she was extremely upset. And I didn't really understand why at all. I was just a bit perplexed, if I'm honest with you. So we drove home, and she was upset the whole way home. And about a month later, she told me that she'd found out that I was autistic, and the person didn't have any sense of what was next and how to provide people with the right support. And that must have been incredibly difficult for my parents, and it was incredibly difficult for me because it basically meant there was no sense of certainty and hope. And that's, for too many autistic people, that was 25 years ago, by the way. As you can tell, I'm not 12 anymore. I've got quite a lot of grey hair, as my children like to tell me on a frequent basis. I think, what's really difficult for us is acknowledging that this is still the experience of many families, certainly across the UK. When they get a diagnosis, there is no support that follows it. So what we have done is we've created a plan to try and understand how we can make sure that autistic people get the right support from day one, from the moment that they have a diagnosis. And again, it's about evidence-based, sustainable change, which is ultimately needs-led. We know that far too many autistic people are abandoned with almost no support, and that we should be offering autistic people and their families personalised support from day one to ensure that autistic people and families are receiving the help that they need and when they need it. And this boils down to three things for me. It's about avoiding that situation that I talked about and that many autistic people and their families experience. It's about understanding autism. So when we engage with our insight group and our network, they tell us, I want to know what this means for us. I want to be empowered to understand my diagnosis and what it means for my future and how I can practically get on and have the tools to succeed. And that means things like psychoeducation and providing people the right support. These things are possible to sustainably deliver and can be delivered in a cost-effective way. Autistic people need to be, and their families need support preparing for the future, understanding what supports and needs that they have. Again, it's critical that we do that. At the moment, autistic people and their families are not provided with that support, and we don't have proper plans in place. And then it's critical that lifelong support is provided to ensure that throughout people's lifespan, we recognise that autistic people will face challenging moments, like us all, and like everyone in this room. And for autistic people, and if you're autistic, because of the differences and difficulties that you might have, the likelihood of those difficulties happening are higher. And so we need support mechanisms in place to ensure that people can get back on track and living the life that they want to lead as soon as possible. So I don't expect you to read all of this, by the way, but I just wanted to sort of explain the sort of things that are in this plan. So within the plan as well, we have specific projects, and really what we're trying to say is through research and discrete pieces of work, we can implement changes that make a difference. And one of the things that autistic people and their families really tell us an awful lot about is the autism, understanding what the autism diagnosis means for them as an individual is extremely difficult for them. So autism is obviously a spectrum condition. There's a huge amount of variety. It changes from person to person. And so having a more personalised assessment is key. So we're working with the National Health Service to create and implement a strength and needs assessment, which will help autistic people and families to understand the individual's strengths and the individual's needs and ensure that we're taking a more personalised approach to supporting autistic people and their families. And that's so key. It's so key. I'm sure many of you who might have been personally affected by this will read a range of testimonies from people who have different experiences, and really what we all need to understand is what this means for us, what this means for our families. We're creating an artificial intelligence-led community which will give people practical tips for every day based on the lived experience of autistic people and parents and their families. Because I think we have to recognise that we can't do a randomised control trial into everything, but we know that there are real issues that people have every day, going to the hairdresser, trying to find ways to have a balanced diet, where actually parents have been through this, and if we can, in a curated way, help families to understand these day-to-day issues based on the experience of other parents and professionals working in the field, we can really provide practical, personalised guidance. And so that's what we're aiming to do with this project as well. So that's something that's really, really key to us. The other thing I talked about earlier was doubling the rate of employment for autistic people. And we've also created a plan for that. This is really key for us. It boils down to two things. How do we empower autistic people and give them the support that they need? when we speak to autistic people, I think there's a bit of a sense that by the time they've left school, they already face quite significant disadvantages. You know, it really matters, actually, if you've played for a football team, participated in a social club of some sort, or had a part-time job, because that gives you soft skills that help you to get a job when you leave university or when you leave school or leave college. And those friendships as well help with that. And what we find is that some of these privileges that non-autistic people have, autistic people don't necessarily have. And so one of the key things about empowering autistic people is thinking about how we can make the changes that enable autistic people to have those skills. So making sure that autistic people have the skills to be ready for work, and then to understand the supports that they need to thrive in work as well. So much of our research program is really focusing on that. So that's one half of the equation. The second and perhaps more significant half of the equation is about empowering employers. And the key thing with this, and the key argument that we make as a charity around this, is that because autism is part of neurodiversity, and everyone in this room thinks about and sees the world differently, that it is in the interest of organisations and employers to have a strategy that enables all types of people to thrive and succeed. And what we find is that actually many organisations and companies are very on board with that message, but they're struggling to know how to implement it. So what are the practical evidence-based things that we can do to enable this? Because certainly in the UK, and I think this is true in the global economy as well, there's a real shortage of skills. And I think there's a recognition that autistic people have a really valuable role to play in filling those gaps. And so from a business's perspective, there's a huge opportunity here. So one thing that we're really excited about, and we're working with other companies on at the moment, is creating a neurodiversity employers index. And so we're funding work right now to get that off the ground. What it will do is it will act as a measure for every company to understand how effectively they are accommodating neurodiversity in the workplace. And when I say neurodiversity, I don't just mean autistic people, I mean every single employee, and making sure that they're making adjustments for everyone and removing the barriers and enabling everyone to thrive. Because from a business's perspective, this is very simple. Having more diverse teams, more empowered teams, having an environment where everyone can perform at their very best is not just good for every employee, it's good for the organisation as well. And we're finding a huge amount of traction in that area, and we're really excited about it as well. And the great thing about measuring where every organisation is in terms of accommodating neurodiversity is that we can implement interventions where we see, according to a specific indicator, an organisation is failing. And what's exciting about that as well, again, is these will be evidence-based indicators based on people's lived experiences as well. And we're generating not just Autistica, but researchers across the world, huge amounts of evidence on what can work for all people, not just neurodivergent people as well. So I think this is a really exciting area, not just for autistic people, not just for people with their neurodevelopmental conditions, but for society. I remember in the UK 20 years ago, when people used to talk about mental health, they used to think about schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. So they used to think that that was what mental health was. And now, when we talk about mental health, we talk about everyone. And I think that we can be doing the same with neurodiversity as well. And I think that's extremely exciting, because I think it's going to be something that benefits everyone's life. So one of the things that I did when I joined AETAPI is there was a piece of research which came out about a month in from a Swedish research group in Stockholm, led by Sven Bolte's group, and it was a huge piece of work based on health registry data. And in Scandinavia, there are fantastic health registries that are able to track people's lives and understand what's going on according to different conditions. And effectively, this was the first of actually quite a few studies, but one that had proven it on quite a large scale basis that showed that, tragically, autistic people were more likely to experience health problems and more likely to have a reduced life expectancy. And that isn't the case for every autistic person, because every autistic person has their own story. But I think it was really important, and it was important as well because having worked in this area, it was important to recognise that many of the people that I had known who'd died early weren't necessarily unlucky, but actually this was part of a broader and systemic issue. And although this was a difficult topic to discuss, I really felt, and our CEO at the time really felt, that this was something that we had to discuss, because having a reduced life expectancy it's just the most, alongside well-being, it's the most stark inequality you can face. And the fact that nobody was discussing this in autism was something that we needed to radically change. And so we produced this report really outlining the evidence to show that there really was quite a clear, on a global basis, systemic issue that needed to be addressed. And this got a huge amount of coverage at the time, both nationally and internationally. And so we went over to the US and all over parts of Europe and the UK to share the evidence around this. And it has affected policy in a range of ways. It's particularly affected some policies in the US, but it also in the UK. And obviously we raised awareness of this because it has to change, and we need solutions which are evidence-based and practical that can address these inequalities. And one of the things that I did in my time as Director of Science at AETAPI, before I became Chief Executive, was I spoke to a range of different scientists about potential solutions. And one thing that kept coming up was health checks. Could you have an annual health check for autistic people that could be implemented into the health service? So we held a workshop with the world's leading autism researchers on autism in adulthood and physical health, including Hilda, of course. And we looked at a range of different solutions. And one of the things that came through, again, really strongly was health checks. And so myself and the CEO at the time pitched this to a funder, and we got the funding to do some preliminary work on this, like to do a pilot trial. And so we funded that through the Newcastle University, but also as part of the funding we got some funding to support a policy person, and by doing that policy work, we secured autism as a clinical priority within our National Health Service, alongside cancer, heart disease, and mental health, which is a huge and significant achievement, which we're really, really proud of. And in their vision, they adopted Autistica's vision of longer, healthier, happier lives. And within their plan, they committed to implementing the annual health check, subject to the trial showing that we were undertaking, showing signs of effectiveness. So that trial is ongoing right now, and it's also being supported by Newcastle. And there's parallel streams of work going on to test implementation sites as well, and to look at harms and to look at different implementation barriers. But where we are right now is that we hope that this health check can begin to be implemented in the UK by 2024, which is something we're hugely excited about, because this is an area where we need to urgently address these issues. And it's also a great example for us of a great way of showing that you don't need to do the research to then do the policy work. You should be doing both of them in parallel to deliver the most rapid change. And of course, there is no better example of that than what we've seen with the COVID-19 vaccine, which is one of the most remarkable achievements we've seen scientifically. So, I talked about attitudes earlier. I've probably, I'm just conscious of time. I've already talked about this a lot, but I think that the key thing to say here is that, and I wrote about this for the Independent and Yahoo. Every autistic person faces some sort of negative attitude and lack of understanding, irrespective of who you are and who your strengths are and and what your needs are. Sometimes even when you face positive attitudes, they're not particularly helpful. People think that I'm really detail-orientated because I'm autistic, and they're really disappointed when they read the grammar of my emails and the spelling of my emails. So sometimes sometimes they can raise false hopes as well. And I think the key thing to say here is this has a real impact. If every day you're having to battle this because you appear a little bit different, or you do things a little bit differently, or people know that you're autistic, and that leads to preconceptions, it's a huge battle. And I think we need to evolve people's understanding around this, and I'm really hopeful that we can. And one of the reasons that we wanted to focus on this, aside from people telling us it was an issue, is because we really felt that this is an area where we can make real change. And the solutions that we have at the moment aren't always the right ones. There's always people talking about the fact that we need more training. And the challenge I have to that is putting someone on a day-long course actually the right thing to do? Do we know that it changes attitudes? Do we know that it improves knowledge? Is this the most effective way of doing things? And we don't know, because we aren't robustly testing these things. And also, but what we do know is when we have begun to measure these things, is there are some things that can make a real difference. So there's some really exciting research in California which shows that actually, if you explain to children in a classroom about autism and being autistic, that the autistic children are more likely to be accepted in that classroom. And that's one of the most effective things that you can do in terms of enabling that child to thrive in the classroom. And we think that's really interesting. So we've co-funded a piece of research up at Edinburgh University, which has produced a curriculum to tell children about neurodiversity, including different conditions like autism and ADHD and so on. And we've told people about that because we think it's really, really important. And also, we've told children about it because I'm really afraid to tell you all children are better at understanding this than us. And it's because they're much more flexible. They're much more accepting of things. I have a 9-year-old daughter, and I've got recent experience of this. So I was talking to my wife about the fact that I'm going to have to explain to my 9-year-old daughter that I'm autistic. And I was pretty terrified about it, to be honest with you. I thought this could really profoundly affect her, profoundly affect how she perceives me, how she understands me. And so she'd heard someone say something negative about autism in the classroom. So I sat her down and I explained what autism actually is. And then I told her, actually, I'm autistic and this is how it affects me and this has been my life story. And she said, okay, can I have a snack? It doesn't, they just get their heads around it very quickly. And she hasn't asked me a huge amount of questions about it. It's just a fact for her, and it's just life, And but we need to be thinking about how we change minds and how we convince people this is important and how we create accepting mindsets, because that's going to be key to improving people's lives on an everyday basis. So the final thing I want to talk to you about is anxiety. This is the thing that we hear about as a top priority for research. I know that Jackie Rogers is already talking to you about this, but anxiety is so highly prevalent amongst autistic people, and it exists throughout autistic people's lives. And what we really see from mid-childhood is just real chronic issues which maybe meet clinical or subclinical levels, but it has a significant effect on autistic people's day-to-day lives and their ability to do things on a day-to-day basis. But one of the exciting things about this area is actually we understand a lot about it. We understand increasing amounts, and there's a range of different really good theories and frameworks around uncertainty, which I'm sure Jackie talked about earlier on, and sensory difficulties and social anxiety and specific phobias that we know autistic people have, which are real opportunities to address, present real opportunities to address, because they're a little bit easier to understand than perhaps some of the more complicated things associated with autism, such as issues with social communication. So we've definitely got some really promising interventions and treatments out there. I'm really proud that we've managed to convince the public funder in the UK to do a trial of an antidepressant called sertraline, which will help with the management of anxiety. But we also have psychological therapies, which we've been funding to trial, including some of the work that Jackie was presenting to you earlier. But I think more needs to be done, not just in looking at treatments, but also looking how we prevent anxiety. This is where I think we can learn from other areas of medicine. If in another area of medicine, if in an area of medicine we know that if you have condition X, you're very likely to have condition Y, we don't just wait until condition Y happens. We do something about it. And what I'm really interested in autism is how do we get better at preventing anxiety in autistic people, not just waiting for it to happen and then dealing with it. So I think we need to take a much more proactive approach in terms of understanding the factors that lead to anxiety in childhood through into adulthood, and preventing those, not just waiting for them to happen. And then at the other end of the scale, we know that many autistic people go on to experience quite severe mental health problems, and there's a huge proportion, certainly in the UK, of people who are inpatients in mental health units who are autistic. And that's really because we don't understand why they've got there, and we don't have evidence-based strategies to avoid that from happening and then reintegrate autistic people back into society. So there's a huge amount of work we need to do to understand that and to develop effective strategies. So I think the key thing to say here is that autistic people do experience significant inequalities, but also have a huge amount to offer society. And what I feel with these goals and the work that we're doing, by working with autistic people and their families, by really valuing the power of research and linking that to real-world change, and having clear goals, we have a real opportunity over the next decade to deliver huge change for autistic people and their families. And so while there are significant challenges, and in many ways we are at the foothills, I think we really have to embrace the fact that there is also a huge opportunity to change this, and there are solutions that are implementable, that are sustainable, and that can work for autistic people. And that's what I find extremely exciting to have the opportunity to work on and to share with you all. So thank you very much for listening to me talk about that, and have given me the opportunity to speak to you all today. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, James. Yo creo que ha sido una ponencia maravillosa y sobre todo además agradecerte la humanidad, la cercanía, el contarnos tu propia experiencia personal, que creo que siempre eso nos ayuda. Y además me ha encantado ver cómo planteas, o nos has planteado a todos la opción de la oportunidad, ¿no? La verdad que tenemos muchas oportunidades ahí fuera y, bueno, guiados por la investigación, para crear grandes cambios. ¿Tenemos preguntas para James? Seguro que sí.
¿Sí? ¿Cómo? Ahora. James, felicitarte por tu presentación, por lo práctica que ha sido y lo concreta, ¿no? O sea, es amplísima, pero muy concreta, muy real. O sea, son acciones, que eso es lo que necesitamos. Nada, quería preguntarte, bueno, aparte de compartir contigo lo de las guías y… bueno, yo suelo dar trípticos porque me parecen más rápidos de leer para la comunidad, pero creo que es muy necesario esa visibilidad. Y bueno, pues me gustaría conocer tus guías, dónde puedo… o dónde podemos ir a buscarlas. Y además me gustaría también que me dijeras el currículo que has dicho que implementáis de la neurodiversidad en los centros, que imagino que será para toda Escocia. Me he enganchado. Que, bueno, pues que me dijeras también dónde podemos consultar. Y nada, súper agradecida a tu aportación. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm just writing notes so I remember everything you said. So I should have put a link to the curriculum. Basically, I almost did it, and I didn't because I thought I've got too many slides as it is. But if you Google Leeds and University of Edinburgh, it's called something about learning about neurodiversity in schools. So it's LEANS, and it's developed by the principal investigator is Sue Fletcher-Watson, and it's led by a researcher called Alyssa Acorn. And yeah, it's a great piece of work. You can find many of the guides on our website. Some of the things that I'm talking about are things that we're going to do next. So some of the work that I'm referring to is in development. So the index, for example, we've just began the work on that. But we also have things like an app called Molehill Mountain, which is an anxiety-based app, which is where people can share their worries and help to manage their anxieties as well. So yeah, if you head to our website, and then Leans is at the Edinburgh website, the University of Edinburgh. Thank you.
Hola, James. Perdona que tuviste que esperar. Tengo un problema técnico yo también. Pero, me has emocionado mucho, porque yo soy aquí dos cosas, de profesional, pero también de madre. Tengo un chico de 16 años y tus metas me han motivado de seguirlas también. Y me ha emocionado mucho tu historia, porque es lo que he vivido yo también. Y en mi país, en Suiza, he montado yo también algo. Y me gustaría muchísimo poder, no solo en un día así de congreso, sino unir esas cosas más, porque esto fortalece a todos. Y lo más bonito, lo que me gusta más es que aquí se vio también otra parte del autismo, que sois fantásticos. Y yo estoy súper feliz de poder pasar todos los días con gente tan fantástica. Gracias.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And I totally agree that there's a huge amount internationally that we can learn from each other. And I think that's going on at a research level, but I think also from a policy and services level, there's huge amounts that we can learn and understand what different countries are doing effectively, because I think nobody's nailing this across the world, right? So some people are doing some things well, and other people are doing other things well. So that's something which really fascinates me as well. Thank you for your comment.
Hola, ¿me oís? Hola, ahora sí, perdón. Felicidades desde el streaming. Resumen, todos queremos tener más James en nuestras vidas. Gracias.
Hello. Hey, James, I'm here. Thank you very much for your presentation. First of all, I'm Carmen. I'm also a professional and a mother of an autistic person. And I would like to ask you about prevention and anxiety. And how do you see from the beginning? Because yesterday we heard Jonathan Green talking about intervention in the first, even before we have the diagnosis. And I would like if you have anything to say about to link, this prevention that we see and we work now in the early infancy, even before the diagnosis, with anxiety in later on stages. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So yeah, I know Jonathan's work really well, because we funded some of that early work, and also Jonathan's on our board at Autistica as well. So there's a few things I think about this. So I think what we're going to be moving towards in terms of intervention and support for people is again, a more of a neurodevelopmental, neurodiversity type model. And I think that one of the things that hopefully, from a research perspective, we'll begin to understand more about is the individual and the person and their needs. And certainly, that's a huge challenge for us because we need, we can't have a situation where there's a child who's 4 waiting till they're 8 to get a diagnosis, or 7 or 8. So we need to understand what that person's individual's needs are much quicker, and give them practical evidence-based support in a quicker way. And in terms of that intervention before diagnosis, it is contentious. I've written a blog on the Guardian website on this. So if you Google James CUSACK Guardian, I've got all of my thoughts there on that sort of intervention. It is quite complex, but it's also very exciting because effectively what you're doing, what Jonathan's results show, is that by adapting to the needs of the person and understanding the person, you develop better communication and language skills, which I think should be seen as a positive sign. And I think that potential harms in that regard are quite low, a potential risk of harms. And so I think those sorts of interventions are likely to help as well in terms of anxiety. Hypothetically, we don't actually have evidence on that, but taking those sorts of personalised approaches where you're helping people around the person and giving them the support that they need, I think is incredibly valuable, and I think a really important first step in terms of reducing the likelihood of anxiety occurring. And then I think it's about recognising some of the potential other triggers as well, and managing that in the most effective way possible.
Hola James, muchísimas gracias por tu exposición. O sea, realmente me has emocionado mucho y yo quería preguntarte cuáles van a ser tus siguientes pasos y qué crees que hace falta para lograr pues una verdadera inclusión entre las personas autistas y el resto del mundo.
So I think we've got a lot to do, and so there's lots to keep us busy. But what we're wanting to do within these goals is achieve specific milestones. So 2030 is not far away, but it's far enough away that people can be complacent about it, right? So every year, what we're trying to do is focus on delivering different things. So making sure we have that index available for employers by the end of next year. The attitudes index is available. The strength and needs assessments are being rolled out to families by around 24-25, like health checks. So although we've got this big ambitious goal for 2030, which we hope really moves the needle for autistic people, it's about taking practical, tangible steps. And also working, I haven't talked about this a lot, but we also work a lot in the UK with the government as well. And working with them to say that irrespective of the complex economic environment, doing nothing is still an action, and making it clear to them that they don't only harm autistic people, but they harm society and they harm themselves by not taking action on this. And actually there are very practical solutions, because I think the key thing that governments need to understand is that burying your head in the sand is not effective for anyone. So I think that's going to obviously be a key priority for us. I'll say it a little bit more nicely to them, but that's generally it's generally, so those are our priorities. Is within each goal having a roadmap which is very tangible, and I every week, every month, every year. I think there's somebody.
James.
Hello.
James, acá. Aquí. Acá. James. Bueno, trabajo con personas adultas autistas y desde allí me parece que mi pregunta apunta desde el uso de la terminología. Las personas con las que yo trabajo no se identifican con la terminología trastorno del espectro autista. Durante el primer día escuchamos a Joaquín Fuentes y él hablaba sobre, planteaba sobre nuevas visiones respecto al autismo. Yo creo que cuando hablamos de nuevas visiones del autismo, creo que también debiéramos replantearnos el uso de la terminología. Las personas con las que yo trabajo no se reconocen como personas no se reconocen como personas con un trastorno. El trastorno hace alusión a algo que está averiado, algo que se averió en el camino. Desde el propio colectivo de personas autistas, incluso prefieren que se anteponga la condición por sobre la persona. Tampoco prefieren ser o no, incluso cuando utilizamos el con autismo. Ellos dicen que finalmente el autismo los define como personas. Y ahí mi pregunta es, ¿cómo prefieres tú que se reconozca a la persona autista? Gracias.
Yes, it's a really interesting question. I think this is a complicated question because it's also about culture and language as well. And so obviously it's going to change from nation to nation, and it depends on how autism situates within different languages. The reason, so you will notice throughout my slides that I use the term autistic person or autistic people. And the reason that I do that is, actually I used to say person with autism, if I'm honest with you, but somebody who before they joined Autistica, they eventually joined Autistica, they're now working for our health service, helping us get the health checks implemented. They did a piece of research looking at what people's language preferences were, and so they prefer to be referred to as autistic people preferred autistic person rather than person with autism, because they saw being autistic as a core part of who they are. So I had to personally, as someone who works for Autistica, recognise that and reflect those preferences and understand that and change. So I've made that change, but it's not clear cut. I know that there are people who see this differently, and there are, I guess, a spectrum of opinions on it in terms of what people's language preferences are. I think it's just important to respect different people's perspectives, and also to respect the fact that within the autism spectrum contains a huge amount of diversity and lived experience, which is a real challenge for us as an organisation, to be honest, in some ways, and is what makes working in this field extremely exciting and rewarding. The reality is that for some autistic people feel, or their families feel, that being autistic is a real challenge for them on a day-to-day basis, and they want really quite direct and specific types of support and intervention to help address those issues and to really improve their quality of life. And for other autistic people, they feel actually they're really proud of who they are, and maybe even with a little bit of understanding from society, their life could be even better. And it's just important that I and the charity and we all do our best to reflect the range of experiences that people have. But it's also very challenging as well, because I think that's where the neurodiversity model is quite helpful, because actually it directly refers to the diversity of experiences that people are having. And it's really important that we don't become too singular when we think about autism.
Muchísimas gracias. Vamos a continuar con el Congreso.
Thank you, everyone.